For today, I'll be demonstrating how to create an add record or a program that will add a record to a table of a database. Of course, using PHP. So this is a continuation or an enhancement of my previous demo. So if you haven't watched the previous demo, previous videos, please watch them before you proceed to this so that you can understand fully this video. Introduction. Again, this is to enhance the previous program where a list of employees were displayed on the screen. And this video, aside from listing the employees, will include the feature that to add records to the table of the database. So this demo needs 3 files: a front-end file listing the employees and displaying the form to be used in adding records, and 2 back-end files. One back-end file is to list the employees and another one to add the record. The file to list employees will no longer be discussed in this video, or will not be thoroughly discussed since this was already discussed in the previous video or videos. So as I've said a while ago, this file contains 3, this demo again will need to use 3 files, and 1 file is for the saving of the record or adding the records to the database. So what we're going to do is to create a PHP file to insert the record to the table of the database. And to summarize the contents of the PHP file, these are the following. First is to connect to the database. The next is to retrieve the data from the form. So again, we'll be typing from the form, and then the data from the form should be retrieved by the PHP file. And then we're going to prepare the SQL statement. So since this is an adding, we're going to add records, then the SQL statement should be an insert statement. And then bind the parameters. And then once we bind the parameters, we execute the SQL statement and then close the connection. So these are more or less the steps or the contents of the PHP file to save the records. So I will not be discussing the connection. So the connection, of course, we need the host, the username, the password, and the database name. So this was discussed in the previous demo. So here, after we open the connection, we have to prepare the statement. But here, we have here mode 1. So we want to reuse this file so that it can also include deleting and updating. But for now, we'll be just discussing adding. And we want that if the mode is equal to 1, that will be adding of records. So we place here, if mode is equal to 1, then we have here the statement, which is actually an insert statement. So insert into emp, then ename, depno, salary, com. So what are these? These are the fields of my table, and the name of my table is emp. Then values, so I place a question mark. These are what we call parameters. So the first question mark corresponds to name. Then the second is depno. The next one is salary, and the fourth one is com, corresponds to com. So after we have our statement, we prepare our statement. So SQL equals, this is my connection, then prepare the statement. So we are not going to execute this at once because, as I've said, we have parameters here. So what we're going to do is to bind the parameters. So SQL bind parameters. Then what we have here are the formats of each of these fields here. So all of them, or this one should actually be DD. So sorry with that. This should be SSDD, not SSSS. So this should be SSDD. So why SS? Because ename and depno, or sorry again, it should be SIDD because ename is a string, depno is an integer. So I'm sorry for this slide. Then D is for salary, that means double, and then com D. So this should be SIDD, not SSSS. So once we bind the parameter, we now execute the statement. So after executing the statement, we close the program. So just like what we have here. So connect to the database, retrieve data from form will be discussed later, prepare the SQL statement, bind the parameters. So we prepare, we bind, execute, and close. So these are the last 4 steps. So to retrieve data, we just use this one. So mode is equal to request mode, and no equals $_request, or we can use $_post. Now request is more flexible, but of course $post is maybe the safest. So rather than request or get. So what we're going to do here is we retrieve these values, and these values are coming from the form in our front end. So these are the name these are the name attributes in our controls, input controls or UI controls from our form or our front end. So we retrieve their values and store them in PHP variables. And what are these variables? These variables correspond to these values here. So whatever we get from our form will be transferred to this one using this bind parameter. And of course, this is our mode. Then this is the connection to the database. So I think the arrangement was was quite juggled. So how do we connect? We have the local host, the username, and the password. Of course, I just replaced this one because this is actually my username or my host name, or actually my username in my infinityfree.com. This is the password, but I made some changes here. So for me to be able to run this locally, I actually replaced the value of host and username and the password. So the name of the database, I copied the name of the database from my Infinity Free account. So connection is MySQL, the host, the user, the password, and DB. So connect to the database. After we connect to the database, the next one is to retrieve the data from our form. Then once we retrieve the data from our form, we prepare the statement, which is actually an insert statement. We bind the parameters, and then we execute our program or our statement. Then we close the database connection. So that is more or less the contents of our saveemp file. Then how about our front end file? So this will be more or less the file that will be seen by the user of the program. So the front end file contains the following. One is the BS4 or the Bootstrap 4 card container, where the list of employees will appear. And actually these are from the previous demo. So previous demo with minor changes. With a button now, so one of the changes is that we place a button to trigger the opening of the modal or dialog form. So aside from this, we have the modal dialog form where user will enter data. So this is a form. And then also our front end contains a JQuery code to list the employees. So just like what we have done in our previous video. And we have another JQuery to initialize the text boxes or other user interface controls of the form when add button is pressed. And we also have the JQuery to save or submit the data entered on the form. So first, the card. So similar with the previous one. So we have the card, we have the header, body, and we have here some sort of input for our search. And what is more important here is we have this division where we have the ID list display, because this is where our list will appear. So again, we have a container and a card. So that we're going to have some sort of heading and footer. Okay, so again, this division will be used to display the list. So more or less, this is the appearance. So this is the card. This is the button we have added. So this one, button. And we have for data toggle equals modal, data target is my form. And I would like, so for you to understand more of this, I would like you to view also my model form video. And I'm going to place maybe the link also below in the description of this video. So, and then we have the input dialog box, and then we have the division where the list will appear. So we have here the button, we have here the text box, and we have here the division where the list will appear. So this is now my list. Then we have the modal dialog form. So this is my modal dialog form. So we have class modal dialog, dialog content, and then we have here now the form. So from this to this, and then the content contains the modal header. So we have the employee name, the employee information, or the title, and the button to close. So the X button that will be used to close the modal dialog. And then we have the modal body, but you notice a line here because I collapsed the modal body first, because I'm going to show the contents of the modal body later. And we have the modal footer. So again, we have the modal header and modal footer inside the modal content. So the modal footer contains two buttons, input type submit, so the submit button and the cancel button. And the cancel button will also close the modal form. So again, this is where the form is displayed. Note that the UI used for the form is hidden, so collapse this one inside the modal body to show the code of this modal dialog. The form tag specifies the method that will be used in passing the data. So the form is one. So the method is post. That's the method we're going to use to pass the data to our file, wherein we're going to accept the data from this form. And that was discussed a while ago, the saveemp.php. So here's, if we expand the modal body, this will be the contents with the modal body. So we have input type hidden, ID mode, name equals mode. So what is important here is the name, especially in PHP. The value here should not be equal to 3 but equal to 1, because we use 1 for adding. Then we have the label, empno, then we have the text box. What's important here is we have empno, we have label, emp name. So name is ename. So these are text boxes. Salary is number. We can also have this as number. Salary as number. And commission, we can also have this as number. So these are the forms. These are the dialog input text boxes. The modal body contains the UI elements of the form. So this was collapsed or hidden in the previous slide. So this part. So that's the modal body. And this is the contents of the modal body. Then we also have the JQuery to list the employee. So we have the function refresh list. So we get the value of a text box. And Ajax, we're going to open the URL of emplist.php. We use the get method, and we pass the contents of this to that file using the get method. So once it is successful, we retrieve the output of this file, which is actually a string representation of the JSON data. So we retrieve that using data. Then we create the table, the header of the table. Then we loop from 0 up to the length of the data -1. Then we just display the contents of the table. So empno, ename, depno, salary, and commission. So once we're through with the loop, slash table, and the contents of the temp will be displayed in the list display. Again, this was already discussed on the previous lecture video, so we'll not be elaborating on that. And then we have here the JQuery to initialize our UI. So if you still remember that these are actually the IDs of the UI controls. Let's go back a little bit. So ID here is empno, ename, depno, salary, and com. So these are the IDs. So if we're going to click the add button, what we're going to do is to display new inside empno, and we display blank for e-name and depno, and we display 0 for salary and commission. So that is the meaning of this, or the explanation of this JQuery routine. So you click the add button. So what will happen? We assign 1 to mode. So that will be our add mode, and then empno is new blank blank 00 for the rest. So this is triggered when the add button is clicked. The UI control or the value of the input tags are initialized to blank string or 0. Mode is set to 1, meaning adding of records a primary key. To value is set to new to notify the user for a new record is to be added. And then the jQuery to save and submit the record. So once we click on the submit button, so this is what will happen. So this portion will actually get the data from the form. Okay, so this will get the data from the form using this method or this class. The mode is equal to get element mode.value. So this is the mode. And then Ajax, we open the saveemp, which was discussed a while ago. If you still if you have forgotten, it contains what? Connection to the database, and then preparation of the insert statement, binding the parameter. Before the preparation, we get the values of the UI controls, and then prepare the SQL statement, bind the parameters, execute, then close the database. These are more or less the steps. So this time around, we'll be opening that, and the data will be passed using post. So that's coming from the form data. So data will be the form data. And once it is successful, we do nothing. Then cache is false, content type false, process data false. So more or less, again, if we click on submit, get the data, get the mode, and then we what? It will get the mode, and then we save the we call the saveemp. So after we save the employee, then we hide the form, and then we again refresh the list. So that ends the explanation of the code. Let me now try to demonstrate the program. But let me check some things first. So this should not be SS. This should be SIDD. So string, integer, double. The mode is just okay. So let's now try to run the program. So we have here localhost, that's the name of the server. Then it is inside the web dev folder, and my file name is emplist.php. So that is now our program. Okay, so we have feed employee IDs, employee name, department number. So this text box is the add button. So if I click on the add button, this will show the dialog. So again, empno is new. That's according to our jQuery. Then blank blank 00, if we still remember. So let's place a name. Let's say the name here is Zion Williamson. Department number 2. Salary is 123, 12,300. Commission is 1,500. So once I click on the submit button, if you still remember, we're going to pass the data using pause, and then we're going to call saveemp. And again, saveemp contains what? Connection to the database, and then we're going to get this data and place it inside variables. We prepare the SQL statement, then we bind the parameters, and in binding the parameters, we get the variables of the values we got from this form, and bind it to our parameters, and then execute the SQL statement, and then that's it. We close the connection. So that will now be able to add the records of my that will add the records, and the values will be coming from this form. So once I click submit, it will close the form, and then you notice it has now added the data that I have encoded. So that is now my program to add records. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm sorry for my PowerPoint. It was, I think the arrangement was quite wrong, but in a way. So I hope that you have more or less understand how to create a program to add records to a table of a database. And I will be placing the code that I've used here in the description, or a link for that code to download the code in the description of this video. Okay, let me now explain the source code of the demo. So let's first take a look at the list emp. So this one will actually create a table. So you have MID, emp name, department ID, and then salary commission. And then next is to connect to the database. Then after connecting to the database, prepare the statement. So select asterisk from emp, then execute the query. After executing the query, we get the result set. So get the result set, and then if the result set is not empty, we fetch each row and place it inside this variable. We extract the row, and after we extract the row, we display the variables. And we do that placing it inside a table row. So at the end, we close the table /table. So that's list emp. And again, this was already discussed in the previous in our previous video. So I will not be elaborating on this. Now the saveemp, if you still remember, what we're going to do with saveemp is first to connect to the database. So this is the code that connects to the database. And after that, we get the values encoded from the form, or in the form, and so this will be passed by the Ajax in our in the program, in our JQuery code, in our front end. So the data that will be coming from the form will be transferred to variables here, PHP variables. And then we test if the mode is equal to 1 for adding. And if it is 1, then we prepare the insert statement. So insert into emp the name of the table. Then we have the 4 fields that will be inserting data to. Then we have 4 question mark here, which are called the parameters. Then what we're going to do is to prepare the statement. So the statement contains the insert statement here. And then we bind the parameters. So we have ename, which is actually a string. Depth null is an integer, that's why I. Salary and commission are double. So after we bind the parameters, we just execute. So whatever be the value here will be substituted here, and this will be placed, the values will be placed inside this question mark. And once we execute the statement, so we have executed the insert statement in our MySQL database. So once we have done that, after execute, we just close, and we already have added the records. Now let's take a look at our demo program, our front end. So we have the proper connection to Bootstrap, JQuery, etc. So once our program is ready, we refresh the list, and the list is actually, our list here is actually the program that will create the table. So we have here the program that will create the table. So that was already discussed in the previous video, so I will not be elaborating on that. So this is now for the search, again on the previous video. So every time we press a key, it will refresh the list. And then here's now the new code. So once we click on the add button, it will again blank department number blank e-name, display new to no, and then display 0 to salary and 0 to commission. And once we click on the submit data, so this is our code now. Once we click on the submit data or submit button rather, then this will get the data from the form. So form 1 here is actually the ID of the form. So ID is form 1. That's why we have here number form 1. So that means we're trying to get the data from this form and place it in form data. And then after that, we use Ajax to open this file, pass the data using pause, and the data will be coming from the form data, which is actually the data from our form. So once it is successful, it will do nothing. Then these are some of the parameters we need. And then after we added the data, so once we execute this one, again, remember that this will execute the insert statement. We already have added the data. Then we close our dialog box or modal form. Then refresh the list. So our list will be refreshed and we'll see that the data is already added. So we have seen that a while ago. And here, so here's our core code. We have the Jumbotron. We have the modal form from this up to this part. So modal dialog, modal content, and inside our modal content we have the form, and inside the form we have the header, the modal header. So that's the header of the modal, and modal footer containing the 2 buttons, and the modal body containing the UI controls. So employee number, employee name. So this one, we can change this one to number. Let's try to edit some. This one also, you can change that to number, but that will be okay. Text will be okay. So we have employee number, name. So these are the IDs. The ID will be used by JQuery or JavaScript, and the name will be used by this one, name. So I usually use the same ID and name, and the name will be used by PHP. So here, these are the names. So this should correspond to these name attributes. So here, this is now our container that contains the card where the list of employees will be displayed. So we have the card header, the card body. The card body contains this one, the list display ID, that is where we're going to list the record. And then it also contains the button, the add button, and the text box where we can use our search. So that's the explanation of the source code that we use in our program. So we're going to take a look again at our program. So here's our program with the card, the button, the text box, and the table. And we just click on this to display the form. We can add values. Once we submit, it will call saveemp, and saveemp will do the insert statement. So once we cancel, that will close our form. So thank you very much again for listening to this video.